What do we tell our kids when a pet dies? As a family, we're still in the fish stage of pets. We haven't moved on to something really responsible like a cat or a dog. And we have a beta fish. His name's Jar Jar, after the, for many Star Wars fans, unpopular character. And it's been interesting just seeing how our boys take care of him, how they interact with Jar Jar. But I've started to process what happens when Jar Jar dies. Our boys have caught fish, and we eat fish as a family, and so they understand how things live and die. But this will be the first time with a pet. And is it different when they maybe move to a dog? When a fish dies or a dog dies, is it different? I know the animals are just animals, but somehow a dog feels a little bit worse. And there's a sorrow that comes with losing a pet. And I think as parents, we want to stop them from experiencing that sorrow. We don't want them to go through the struggle of losing that pet. And we might say something like, oh, are your pets gone to, pet heaven and you'll see them later? Or we might throw out some sort of an excuse to help them get out of the sorrow they feel, because we want to protect them from it. And we do this with lots of stuff, whether it be bullying or not making the grade, not making the team. Struggles that they're experiencing, we want to either protect them from it, block it, or when it happens and we can't do anything about it, we want to quickly somehow make it right for them. We don't often, in our initial motive, just let them experience it or even encourage them to lean into it. It almost seems, from a worldly perspective, in the culture we live in, it seems wrong. And I think that's because we don't want to experience stuff. We don't want to experience sorrow. We don't want to experience struggle. We don't want to experience trial. And we know our kids are going to grow up and they're going to experience it anyway. And so we think if we can shelter them from it as much as possible now, because I think that's what we want for ourselves. We wish that we would be sheltered from. We wish someone or something would shelter us from all sorrow in this world, all struggles, all trial, all difficult things. But today, we're going to be looking at an ancient biblical text that actually says there is value in leaning into sorrow, leaning into the struggle, leaning into the trial, and that it's actually really important for us. It helps us grow. It teaches us things. And if we as adults can learn how to lean into the sorrow and the struggle, maybe we can teach the next generation to do so as well. If you have a print version of the Bible, go to Ecclesiastes 7. You can look it up in the table of contents if you're unfamiliar with how to find Ecclesiastes. Look at the page number and get there. If you have a mobile device, just download a Bible app, write in ECC in the search field, and it'll bring up Ecclesiastes. This is all part of a series called Make It Count. If you only had today, how would you make it count? And we've been working through the book of Ecclesiastes, this ancient document, and big questions by an ancient king named Solomon. And he's been really pushing against some of the worldview that most of us have in modern Western culture, and asking big questions and challenging our ideas. And so that's going to happen today too. And the first piece I want to look at is Ecclesiastes 7, 1-4. Ecclesiastes 7, 1-4. Let's read that together. It says, "A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth." All right, this first principle that King Solomon gives us is to lean into sorrow. He's trying to do a little bit of a challenge here between wisdom and foolishness, and he's saying that part of wisdom is leaning into sorrow. And again, that doesn't seem really right for us. It seems challenging. It seems that if we had a choice, we would absolutely not choose sorrow. we would choose laughter and joy and amazing experiences. But he's saying, look, better off is a funeral. Better off is the difficult feelings, emotions, thoughts, that this is where wisdom is found. And this isn't just about life and death. This is a picture that he's talking about all struggles, because some of us really do experience the sorrow of losing a loved one. That's a real thing. And that's a difficult journey, perhaps one of the most difficult. But there's also sorrow in losing a job, which many people, maybe even you, have lost your job in the past few months. There's loss of a lot of things, a move. Maybe you've lived in a home for a long time and you've had to move for work or some other life experience, and you're leaving that home that you loved or that city you loved. A lot of college and university students feel a real loss if they've lived on campus and in residence and they move away, and there's a community loss. There's lots of loss in life and sorrow, things that are difficult that we have to walk through. And I think in our culture right now, we've experienced significant loss in really the key thing, the funeral, the death piece. Some people have known loved ones, friends, family members, church attenders, community members that have passed away due to COVID-19. And then there's the whole trials that are going on in the United States mostly, but in protests all over the world now, around the murder of George Floyd. And so now there's some murders that have happened within the protests and people looting. And so there's these things of death, both in disease and violence. And we want to initially we want to block that away and say, oh, no, I don't want to think about that. I don't want to think about that. And Solomon's like, no, lean into it. Because if you lean into the death and you lean into the sorrow, that's where big questions come. As I was processing this whole concept and the deaths we've heard about, the deaths we've known about across the world and our country and beyond, and even just death that I've experienced in my own life and others have, I was listening to a podcast. It was a CBC podcast, and they were the concept was the other crisis that's been going on, underneath and kind of lurking within the COVID-19 crisis. And I was intrigued. And they started talking about the Canadian opioid crisis. And that Canadians, in particular, have a massive opioid problem. And that this opioid crisis has actually increased significantly since COVID-19. They released some stats. Check this out. In BC, there was a 93% spike in deaths under the COVID lockdown, with a record of 170 deaths in May, which total more than the total fatalities of COVID-19. And it's not just British Columbia. Ontario had a spike, a little less than BC, but Ontario had a 25% spike in opioid deaths under the COVID-19 lockdown. And Alberta, they just gave out this stat about 911 calls related to overdoses, that it spiked from an average of 257 calls pre-COVID to currently 550 average 911 calls related to overdoses since the lockdown. As I was listening to this, I was like, wow, I haven't heard about this. This is the first thing. And I was trying to wrestle with, 170 deaths in BC in 1 month, that it's greater than that. And I'm not saying that death in any way, shape, or form is lesser or more, but I think culture has said this. And the guy interviewing this kind of expert and a person who works with people in addiction in British Columbia, his name is Garth Mullins. And they were asking him, why do you think this is? And they said, why isn't this a crisis? And his answer really hit me. And it hit me related to kind of studying this passage. He said, the wrong people are dying. I'll say that again. So the interviewer says, why isn't this a crisis? And he said, the wrong people are dying. And from someone who comes at life from a Christian worldview, from a biblical worldview, this is a little bit telling, because our world wants to say everyone's equal, everyone's truth is equal, all people are valuable. But what this guy's coming at and saying, actually, when we look at death, not everyone does have the same value. Because we saw with COVID-19, if someone died of complications of COVID-19, we were concerned. When people are murdered by police violence or protesting or looting or violence and all that. We are concerned. But what he's making a statement here, he's like, the wrong people are dying, saying the massive amount of deaths related to drug overdose, people don't seem to care as much. He didn't go out and say that, but that wrong people are dying. That's what's happening. Is in our country here in Canada, we're placing different value on people that depending on what the circumstances are. But when I think about it for myself and I think about what Psalm's saying, he's like, lean into the sorrow, lean into the funeral, the death, ask the big questions. Don't avoid it, dig into it, let it sit. And when I do that, I'm like, you know what? That person who died has a mom and dad who love them. They have siblings and friends who love them. And so many people, often with opioid addiction, sometimes they start, many people start on pharmaceuticals that were prescribed to them for pain, and so they got hooked, and then eventually it leads to street drugs. There's not every situation, but there's a lot that happens. That is a problem, and that's a trend. But once someone uses drugs in our culture, what the statistics are telling us is like, we kind of want to stay away from that. But is their death and the loss of their life any more or less important when God loves all people and wants relationships with them, with all people? He wants all people to acknowledge him and come back into a redemptive relationship with him, any and all people. And if people die from either disease or violence or from addiction and overdose, all of that is sorrowful, and we lean in. But maybe you're thinking, okay, you gave all these stats, and we live in Whitehorse in the Yukon, it's not a big deal here. It is a big deal here. And no one's really talking about it here either. People are actually really struggling under the lockdown, and drug addiction is a real problem. And maybe you're even thinking, well, this is the outside world, and if you go to church regularly, or maybe you go to Mountain View Church, you're like, no, it doesn't touch us. But that's not true either. I have been given permission to tell a little bit of a story that happened at the end of February. Right as COVID-19 was really, getting traction. A parent that attends our church early in the morning found their teen unconscious and not breathing. Immediately called 911 and is with the 911 operator just doing CPR. Now, the backstory of their teen is their teen had a drug problem and had wanted to get help and had actually tried to get into a rehab center, tried to get help, but they didn't have any room. And he wanted to get better. And so what he did is he managed to get a hold of some methadone. Now, methadone is often used in clinics to help get people off of different opioids. And so he was on methadone, and he thought, I'm going to just lock myself in my basement, and I'm just going to kind of self-rehab and start the methadone process and get off drugs. And unfortunately, without doctor supervision, he overdosed on a drug that's often given to help addicts. This parent told me, in that moment, there was this place that they found themselves. They were completely undone. And this parent prayed and said, God, your will be done. God, your will be done. It was a short prayer, but as this parent has described to me, they were in full submission in that moment. They realized that they had no control, they had no power, they had nothing. That this would be the greatest moment of sorrow in their life. And instead of trying to panic, there was a calm, and this parent realized that only God, there is only one source in this moment where I can get help, and laid out everything, open hands, and said, God, your will be done. God, if it's my child's time, I'm going to have to walk through that. I'm going to have to deal with the sorrow, but I'm asking not. But either way, your will be done. And in that moment, in that prayer, that slight minor prayer, that parent said, God, your will be done, that teen breathed life and started breathing. And the 911 operator coach them through the process. And that teen is doing better and on a journey to recovery, leaning into the sorrow. And this story that's happened, this is Whitehorse, this is Mountain View Church, this is the life of everyday people. Don't ever think that church people and people who attend church, they don't got stuff going on. They do. There is sorrow. And a lot of times we want to block it away, we don't want to know. But what Solomon's saying here, he's saying, no, lean into it. The struggle, the trial, no matter what it is, lean in. Then he moves on. There's the struggles in life, and we can experience sorrow for numerous ways. And then he moves into something called rebuke, verses 5-7. Here's what he says. He says, it is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fools. This is also vanity. Surely oppression drives the wise man into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Now, this word rebuke, if you're new to church or Christianity, you might not know what rebuke means. A rebuke is a harsh correction. Now, a rebuke can come from two places. A rebuke can come from someone who doesn't like you and doesn't care about you. And that's really difficult. And sometimes it's a challenge to listen to that. But that's not what Solomon's talking about. He's talking about for those people in your life, they care about you, they love you, they care about your future, they want you to win in life, they want you to succeed, they want you to be healthy. When those people rebuke you, he's saying that is wise if you listen to that rebuke. If you don't dismiss that, then that is an amazing thing, and you need to lean into that rebuke. Lean into that rebuke. Then he uses this little bit of a picture here. He talks about the crackling of thorns under a pot is like the laughter of fools. Now he's like, the crackling of thorns, I don't get this. What's this word picture? And you have to understand ancient culture and specifically around the area of Palestine. Because when it was written at this time, the first readers of this would have understood what he's saying. And the crackling of thorns was often used as kindling. You would use dry thorns, and if you were going to cook something, in a pot or boil water, you would put the thorns underneath, and they would burn quickly. And the crackling, just like for us, if we have a campfire, when you first light that kindling, there's a nice crackling, and it's a nice sound. And you see the fire going, and it's catching, and you're feeding it. And that's kind of what the thorns were used for. But no one at that time would cook with thorns. That's just to get a good base for your fire. Just like us, we wouldn't cook with kindling. We want kind of some longer lasting, maybe some hardwoods or something like that would burn down, make nice coals, have a long, even temperature. Now in Palestine, this is going to be a little bit crazy maybe for some of you. They still do it in some other parts of the world, but they would use cow patties, dried cow dung, and they would collect these. And they were dense, but they burned slow and long. And so after you had the crackling of the thorns and the kindling, you would add these dried kind of dung heaps or dung patties. They would burn like low and slow, which would create a very good base fire for cooking on. So now we get back to these rebukes. And why is he using this example? He's trying to say, like, here's what laughter and people who always maybe give you praise and accolades, because we love that, don't we? We always want people to tell us how great we are, and we only want to hear good things. And he's saying, that's kind of like the laughter of fools. It sounds really good, but in the end, it won't last. It's not as meaningful as leaning into the rebuke. And if we think of Palestine and what they used as a long burn, what this culture at this time would have envisioned, you think, well, the burning of dung piles, like that seems really, really gross. And maybe it is. It's kind of harsh. But it's better for cooking, better for boiling water. It's a longer lasting fire. It's better in that world. And this is kind of what it might be like. You have someone in your life, just like I do, or maybe there's more than one. They love you. Sometimes they pull you aside and they say, hey, look, this is not good. You're getting this wrong. You got to correct this. You're not acting properly. You're not speaking properly. And it may feel like dung. You may not like it. It doesn't look good, sound good, whatever, but it lasts. Rebuke from someone who loves you and cares for you, if you take that in and say, okay, I need that in my life, I need people challenging me, that has a long burn. That lasts. That's meaningful. I know for me, just to be totally vulnerable with you and honest, in case there's anyone out there that think pastors have it all together, they don't. I do not have it all together. And actually, in this journey over the past few months, I've been just, broken a lot of times. I'm just beat down. I've worked harder in these last seasons where we haven't had physical church than I ever have. And other pastors are reporting the same thing. Everyone I talk to, all the stats that they're feeling the pressure, not only of just trying to keep things going online like this and try to make everything work and still keep people connected, but also looking to reopening and the stresses that come with that. And, I knew it was impacting me, and I knew I was feeling the pressure of that, but I wasn't really checking in with how that might be coming across in certain situations and issues. And, I can publicly thank our elder, Mark Shore, because last week or the week before, he pulled me aside. And I know he cares for me. He cares for my ministry. He cares for our church. He cares for our city. And he pulled me aside and he's like, Jeremy, you're kind of bitter and defensive. And at first, if someone tells you you're bitter and defensive, it gets your back up, right? You're like, what? What are you talking about? But as soon as he said it, I realized, this is a great rebuke. This guy wants the best for me. He cares for me and my family. He cares for my ministry here. He wants me to be a successful pastor. He wants me to have a long ministry. He wants me to impact Whitehorse and the Yukon with the gospel. He wants all those things. I know that. I know that he doesn't have it out for me. And so I have to say, oh, wow, he's trying to help me. And that's hard. It's not easy. And you may have someone right now who they love you and care for you. They want a bright future for you. They want you to learn. And you got to go through that struggle because they've pulled you aside and said, look, you're not doing this right. Or this thing, this behavior, this action, these words, you're messing up. And you love the person so much that you have to accept it. They want the best for you. And I get it. This is different. There's going to be people that want to use rebuke and they want to force their way on you or just use it to pull you aside and say, hey, I have something to tell you. And their life and how they live their life and who they care for, how they care for people, that tells a story. You can see who's foolish and wise. But what Solomon's saying is if a wise person, if someone who really cares and knows and who you look up to, when they pull you aside and rebuke you, don't dismiss that. Lean into that rebuke. Let's move to the last bit. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning. And the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. This piece, Solomon's saying, lean into the end. Lean into the end. Because when we focus on the sorrow and the struggle and the trial, when we lean into that, we get a bigger perspective. But he helps us remember that we need to focus on where we're headed and that all the sorrow, the struggle, the rebuke, the challenge, the trial, that this is building in us. And we're going to end off better if we lean into it. And when we lean into the end view of where we're going to be, that helps us lean into the rebuke, lean into sorrow, lean into the trial, all those things. And, I often, if I'm speaking to parents a lot of times, they might ask about a certain thing. How do I do this with my kid? What if they ask this? And there's lots of questions when you're a pastor because people want their kids to grow up well or their grandkids. And they often, sometimes as parents, me included, you can get lost in the details. And I try to help them. I say, will this matter on graduation day? And for my wife, Nicole, and I, we have this discussion often. She'll challenge me back with my own advice sometimes. Will this matter on graduation day? When they got their diploma in hand from high school and they're headed off to college, university, taking the steps towards adulthood, will this thing right now that seems so intense, is this struggle, is it that important? See, this is what happens when we lean into the end. And this can help us parenting. But maybe for you, maybe you're a teenager or a young adult. Try to imagine you're 35. Will this matter when you're 35? Because at 35, most people have kind of gotten into their career. They've usually found their partner, spouse. They might be starting to have kids. 35 is kind of that, you're kind of got there. You haven't fully arrived, but you've definitely established in your life, you're comfortable with who you are. And so for teenagers and young adults, I often say, picture yourself at 35 with a spouse, with a career, with a couple kids. Will this thing that you are so wrapped up in, will it matter then? And often, if you can get a teenager or young adult to think about 35, like, I probably won't even remember this. And again, it doesn't mean that we avoid the struggle, avoid the sorrow, but when you lean into it and you lean into the end view, it helps you work through it. And for those of us, like I'm 41, and for those of us over 35, I think we can focus on the porch swing. I often talk about, imagine yourself on the porch swing, even maybe with your spouse or a good friend, family member, or maybe your grandchildren are on your lap and you're swinging on the porch swing, you're listening to them, and you're looking at life and you're reflecting, what does your legacy hold? When we look to the end, lean into the end, that porch swing, will what's happening now matter? How much will it matter? And how we act in that, what will happen? And so Solomon's talking about this, focusing on the end. Be patient. It's a marathon. It's a long game. You need to keep working through it and have the end in place. But here, check out this. So this verse in 10, it says, say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. You see, once we get over 35, we often think that the good days are gone. This is exactly what he's talking about. We look back and go, the good old days, the former days. I know for me, I'm entering my 40s, and I find myself, also, thinking about teenagers. Say, you don't know what it was like. It was better when I had to go to a phone booth and actually had to call my friends, or I had to go to my house and I had to get a landline, and I kind of treat them a bit like that, pre-mobile devices. But then I realized that there's someone above me that's like, you had a phone booth, you had a landline. I had nothing. We had to walk or meet people there. And so every generation will always say, in my day, it was better. In my day, it was better. And that's this, just so you know, this is like ancient document. That was happening then. But here's the harsh part. When we do that, when we say, the past days were better, he's saying, no, you're not saying that from wisdom. Does that mean it's foolish? When I say the good old days are better, that's what he's saying. That's foolishness. You see, he's saying it's easy to look back at the past and say, those were good days, now's terrible, and you just act like that. But he's saying, no, the end is what you need to be focused on. That you can't change the past. You had some good times, you learned. Now is a struggle maybe, now it's a trial, but you need to push through it, and you can't just reflect on the old. You got to keep moving forward because the end is coming. And when you're on that porch swing, when you're looking at life, before you die, you're going to say, okay, what did I do with my life? Now that I'm at the end, and because I've been focused on the end my whole life, okay, we did this. But maybe you're saying, how does this help me now? I'm in sorrow, I'm in struggle, someone's rebuked me. I do reflect on the good old days, and I can't move forward. I'm kind of stuck. Well, this pointer to the end is really a pointer to the bigger picture that we've talked about all through this series. Ecclesiastes is part of the Old Testament, and it's a pointer to the New Testament. It's a pointer to Jesus. Jesus always finishes the story that Solomon started. If you go to Matthew chapter 11, Matthew 11 verses 27 to 30. He says, all things have been handed over to me by my Father, God. And no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son, Jesus, chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. You see, maybe you really are in sorrow and you're trying to figure out why. And that's an important question. I'm telling you to lean into sorrow, lean into rebuke, lean into the end. Solomon was talking about that. And you're like, well, why? Why can't I just try to shelter myself from everything? What's the point of going through struggle? Why is that important? It's because in that moment, when we're knee deep, maybe neck deep in the struggle and in the sorrow and in the trial, we are undone. We're broken. And in the moment where we're totally broken and undone, that is the moment when God steps in, sends his son Jesus, and restores us. That is the moment when Jesus can capture us and bring us in, and he can show us what a better way to live is. He can show us how to lean in on him. He can show us a way through the trial, way through the struggle. And often when we try to block everything, shelter everything, we try to manage everything, that is very difficult for us to see Jesus through that. But when we're undone, it's in that moment where we realize how powerless we are. And when you lean into it and you realize, I can't do anything. Sometimes he doesn't save people's lives. Sometimes he doesn't just heal the illness. Sometimes he doesn't just give us work, doesn't just take away the problem. Sometimes he doesn't. But what he does is he says, I will be there with you. I will walk with you, and you won't be lonely. Wherever you're at today, I want to give you an opportunity. We're going to pray, and you're going to have an opportunity to place that trust, that contentment, or being used by Jesus. Let's pray. Dear Father, I, like everyone else, have struggle. I have sorrow. I have trials, and they weigh me down. I don't fully know why. I know you do. But today I choose to trust in you. I choose to trust in Jesus. I choose today to not follow the things of this world that are empty, futile, meaningless, but that today I choose to find contentment in Jesus. And today I ask, may I be used by you. You know the skills that I have. You know the gifts that I have. You know my hands, my voice. You know my abilities, and I would just ask to be used by you. And Father, you know the struggles I have. You know the trials I have. You know the sorrow of what I've experienced, and it's deep in my heart. And I want to give that over to you. I'm burdened and I'm heavy laden, but I want rest. But moreover, I want you to use that burden for your mission in this world. I want people to know about you too. And if you want to choose to use my struggle for your plan, I want to submit that now to you. I ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.